A big welcome to everybody who is connecting around the world. Do feel free to do introductions in the chat room so that people get to know who is connected and who has joined us for this conversation. As Victoria said, this is our third in our series of hot topics on PPPs. We started with a discussion on what are some of the PPP transactions doing with this rapidly changing environment on interest rates, rapidly fluctuating exchange rates, and inflation that many countries are being faced. On the second workshop, we look at how our countries setting up, managing, and growing project preparation funds for PPPs. You know how expensive they are to prepare, and therefore that continuity and the signal from the government that a strong pipeline of PPP transactions is being prepared is fundamental to be attractive to the private sector. Today, we're going to be talking about new technologies and the role of PPPs in this transaction. And the next session, and let me do a pitch for the fourth and final session, is going to be on new sources of funding to mobilize more public funding to be able to leverage even more private funding. So those are the four workshops. We are very glad to count among our co-sponsors the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, PPIAF of the World Bank, the Ministry of Finance of Egypt, and very importantly, our new and very strong partner, WAPPP, the World Association of PPP Units and Practitioners. Today, our workshop is organized the following way. I will be doing a quick introduction to the topic so that give you a little bit of context of why this topic was selected as a hot topic for our series. Then we are going to be having an overview presentation from the Global Infrastructure Facility, looking at new technologies on climate change and how they're being used in PPPs and how to handle that those uncertainties in the technological change. Then we're having a fantastic panel with members from the World Resources Institute, the World Bank, and WAPPP to discuss from the different perspectives this important issue of new and disruptive technologies in PPPs. So let me start briefly with the presentation to give you a little bit of a context of how we ended up talking and discussing this issue. And this all came because we were designing this workshop with our partners who went around and asked their partners, look, what should be some of the hot topics? And this issue of new technology, disruptive technology in PPPs came really strongly. So let me give you a little bit of a context. So for example, in the energy sector, renewable energy cost and technological development are moving extremely fast. When people were looking in the 90s and the early 2000s, what is it that was happening? Turns out that PV technologies and wind and solar thermal were just dropping dramatically in terms of cost per kilowatt hours. And at this current point, it's actually becoming more cost effective than some of the fossil fuel-based energy generation. So if you were designing a PPPs in the 1990s for a contract of 30 years, turns out that actually the technologies that you were selecting there actually could have been very expensive today. And actually some of the ICT technologies on blockchain technology on smart grids are changing so rapidly that a PPP done in the early 2000s actually would be today looking like an extremely old PPP and would not be potentially competitive in the market in that process. And we are seeing the same thing, for example, with the electric bus market, where the global market is expected to reach basically $686 trillion by 2026. It is growing almost 27% year to year. So it's just amazing at the technological changes, at the development of the batteries, at the way in which those batteries are being switched day after day after day, you're seeing new models and new development into this process. So if you are a city that is interested in bringing electric buses into the cities and is really figuring out what to do on a PPP contract, this rapidly changing market becomes a critical risk or an opportunity depending on how you look at it. This graph from the International Energy Association is looking at the current and announced zero emission commercial vehicles for freight transport. And what you're beginning to see year after year after year in the category on the top of the medium duty truck and step van and the heavy duty truck is that it's growing quite rapidly and it's growing very diverse, and it's not only in China but in many other countries around the world. So when you're thinking about a PPP for a highway, the fact that a lot of your customers are going to be electric vehicles means that the contracting thinking and the way in which you need to approach the evolution of the infrastructure that is going to be in place needs to be a lot more dynamic than if you were doing a toll road PPP 10, 15 years below. This is a graph from one of our partners, the Global Energy Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization, that has an interesting report about the key technologies that are helping the new electrification process currently taking place. And therefore, what are the mature technologies that you have right now? What do they expect to have in the next 5 years by 2030, and which ones by 2035? And the change is radical from 17 new technologies that has been applied today that are mature. You're going to have 8 new ones in 2030 and 7 new ones in 2035. So if you're looking at transport, industry, or energy sector, and you're looking at PPPs, these rapid changing technologies means additional flexibility and additional risks. Our friends at GEICO analyze also what is the current development and opportunities on a global interconnection for energy, all the way from high voltage transmission lines to submarine cables, you name it, to be able to connect regions with very high potential for renewable energy, particularly solar and wind, with regions that are highly consuming this. And in the development on energy connectivity are going to be a critical part of the solutions for the climate change problem. So even on energy transmission, a lot of the changes that you're also seeing in generation are being replicated in that process. And let me not talk about the smart ports, because the artificial intelligence and big data and IoT sensors, blockchain, new applications of 5G are really transforming the way in which ports are being operated, all the way from far more efficient operations, better management of assets, a smarter movement of goods and containers, and of course, a smarter monitoring and management of environment and pollution that is so critical, particularly for ports in urban areas. So it's not only the physical infrastructure, technological development, but it's also some of the backroom information-based technologies that are affecting the way in which these ideas are happening. And if you look at the potential of artificial intelligence in infrastructure management, pretty much every area of connectivity infrastructure, from transport to logistics, from construction management to the power sector, all of them are going to be hopefully transformed in radical ways and very positive ways in the very near future. So what I wanted to give you is a little bit of a landscape to understand that this level and speed of technological development is something that we haven't seen in past decades. And there are also some cautionary tales in the process. So Morocco, for example, built the largest concentrated solar power plant, an enormous array of curved mirrors that reflect sun over the central tower that you see there, and use sophisticated sand materials to store energy that actually function not only as a way to generate electricity, but also as a way to store that process. But actually, a few years later, then the battery storage technology changed radically. The way in which solar panels have been developed changed radically for the better. And therefore, Morocco is actually in the middle of renegotiating the second phase of this project, because they're saying, look, I'm sorry, but what we were looking at the time of the bidding has just changed radically in the last 2 to 3 years. So there are cautionary tales on technologies that we will be discussing during this workshop today. And it's not only the technologies that are changing rapidly, but it is also, for example, the urgency on taking action for climate change mitigation, for the reduction of greenhouse gases, as well as a much better understanding and a realization of the risks related to climate change, the impacts that are taking place at a rate that is much faster than science was predicting just 10 years ago, and therefore the need for new technologies for adaptation. So a message that many of the clients of our partners were saying is that, look, change is inevitable in long-term infrastructure PPPs on the technological front. So the question is, as one of our panelists has coined the term, how to enhance innovation resilience. Jenny later will talk a little bit about that, and to adopt continuously new technologies for greater performance and greater sustainability of infrastructure assets and operations in PPPs, how to design those contracts in a way that actually the operator considers new technologies as they come in, and their incorporation and their choice becomes a natural way of how things get done, as opposed to a complicated and egregious renegotiation because you want to bring new technologies. How do you design PPP contracts so that that's the normal way of operating, that you get better and better as time goes by? And also, we will be discussing how to choose technologies for new PPPs, given the uncertainties and the cautionary lessons from the past in terms of technologies. It is actually a scary fact. It is one where that balance between being at the frontier and prudence on the selection of the technology is critical for the contracting agency. And therefore, we will be discussing some of the options, choices, tactics, and strategies that many countries around the world have been following in this topic. So with that, let me repeat, we're going to be having a presentation, an overview presentation from the Global Infrastructure Facility in the World Bank, and then we're going to be having a panel discussions with practitioners. We want to make these conversations very practical, very conversational. I encourage you to submit your questions, post them in the chat room function. I will be monitoring the chat room, and then I will be grouping, modifying, adapting, and bringing them into the conversation first with our presenter and then with our panelists.